Before we begin, if you've ever believed that healing can come from the quietest moments, a touch, a glance, a second chance, then this story might be meant for you. Leave a like if you're here for something real. And subscribe, not for forever, but for the days you need something that stays. The rain came suddenly that afternoon. Sharp, cold, and fast. The kind of rain that seemed to cut sideways through the wind, soaking through jackets, whispering through window cracks, and setting into old wood like regret. Daniel tightened the hood of his jacket and leaned into the wind, hammering the final shingle into the roof of Ridgewood's old chapel. It wasn't a job that paid much, but that wasn't why he did it. He did it because the roof leaked and someone had to fix it. He climbed down the ladder, wiping damp hands on his jeans, and gave a quick nod to his 10-year-old son, Max, who waited under the chapel's porch with a thermos of tea and a soaked beanie. "Almost done," Daniel said. Max didn't answer. He was squinting through the chapel doors. "There's someone inside," Max murmured. "I saw something white, like a dress." Daniel frowned. The place should have been empty. The wedding scheduled that day had been called off that morning. The pastor told him the groom had left town without explanation, but the doors weren't locked. Daniel pushed them open with a quiet creak. The inside of the chapel was dim, lit only by the soft gray glow filtering through stained glass windows. The air smelled of wood polish and old pages. Rain tapped steadily on the high rafters above, and there, sitting alone in the center aisle, was a woman. She was dressed in a white gown, her back to him, her shoulders still. A veil had been thrown over the seat beside her like an afterthought. Her hands rested on a bouquet that had begun to wilt. Her chair had wheels. She didn't look up. Daniel hesitated, then took a step closer. The sound of his boot on the wooden floor echoed too loud, too sudden. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the woman said before he could speak. Her voice was low even. "I just needed a place to be quiet." Daniel stood still. Her hair was damp and clung to her neck. Her gown was stained at the hem with rainwater and something darker, mud maybe, but her posture remained upright, composed, strong. "I can leave," she said. "I'll leave if I'm not supposed to be here." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wasn't sure what to say. Max's voice came from behind. "Dad, she's shivering." The woman finally turned. Her eyes were clear, blue-gray, not pleading but tired. Tired in a way Daniel understood far too well. "Please," she said, softly. "Just one night. I won't ask for anything else." Grace. That was her name. She hadn't planned on coming to the church after he left her. She just didn't know where else to go. The hotel wouldn't let her check back in. Her phone was dead. Her hands were still shaking from the wheelchair ramp breaking outside the wedding hall. She laughed dryly when she told him. "I guess I thought maybe someone would see me. Here, if I wore the dress." Max sat on the porch steps, watching her with the open curiosity only a child could offer. Daniel didn't speak. He drove her back to their house on the edge of town, his jaw tight, hands clenched on the steering wheel. He didn't ask questions. Grace didn't ask him anything either. That night, she ate a bowl of soup at their kitchen table. It was a small kitchen, faded cabinets, a slow fan overhead, a single bulb that hummed faintly when the rain got too close to the power lines. Max chatted about school. Grace smiled, nodded, listened. Daniel sat across from her in silence, stirring, soup he never brought to his lips. Later, when Max had gone to bed, Grace rolled her chair toward the back window, staring out into the dark yard. A single tree stood there, leafless, old, half-split from a lightning storm years ago. "It's beautiful," she said. Daniel followed her gaze. "It's dead." "No," she said quietly. "Just waiting." He didn't answer. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat on the living room couch, a photo frame resting in his lap, its edges singed from a fire long past. Inside was a half-damaged photo, a woman with soft eyes and a boy no older than 4, Anna, his wife. The house had burned 5 years ago. She didn't make it out. He ran his fingers over the frame, then tucked it back into the drawer before the memory dragged him under. In the morning, Max found a note on the edge of Grace's pillow. It was written, in pencil, slightly crooked. "If you need a place to rest, we have a couch too. I used to be afraid of storms. Mom always said people who cry during storms are the bravest." As the first sunbeam broke through the misty window, Grace turned to Daniel in the hallway. "I'll leave today," she said. Daniel looked at her, looked at the way her fingers fidgeted with the fabric of her sleeve, at the way she tried to say it like she didn't care, like leaving was easy. He nodded once, but as he turned away, something stuck. The room down the hall, Anna's old sewing room, had been closed for years. He walked to it, opened the door slowly, and turned on the light. The air smelled like cedar and thyme. Grace followed behind him in silence. He didn't look at her as he stepped aside. "The bed's still made," he said. She said nothing, but the sound of her wheels moving forward was answer enough. Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring at the tea kettle long after it had gone quiet. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the stillness it left behind was heavier than the storm. He hadn't planned on letting her stay, hadn't planned on speaking to her, much less opening that room, Anna's room. But the moment Grace looked up at him in the hallway, wet-haired, exhausted, too proud to beg, something shifted, like a breath held too long finally released. Now the guest room door was closed and the kettle was cold. Daniel poured the tea anyway. The house felt smaller with another adult in it. Quieter too, though Grace hardly made a sound. No footsteps. Just the occasional soft creak of wheels on wood. But Daniel felt her presence in every corner. The folded blanket on the couch, the empty mug in the sink, the faint scent of vanilla from her shampoo hanging in the hallway. He'd learned to live with ghosts. He hadn't expected to host the living. Max woke first. He padded into the kitchen in mismatched socks, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and climbed onto a stool with the effortless trust of a child who hadn't yet learned to fear what morning might. "Bring. Is she still here?" he asked. Daniel nodded, setting toast on a plate. "She's in the guest room." Max's face brightened, then turned serious. "Can we keep her?" Daniel almost dropped the knife. "She's not a puppy, Max." "I know," Max said. "But she looked really sad yesterday. And I think people who are that sad shouldn't be alone." Daniel stared at his son. Sometimes the kid said things that felt like they belonged to someone much older. He turned away, muttering, "It's just for a night." Grace emerged later, dressed in the same wrinkled blouse and jeans she'd arrived in, her wedding dress carefully folded over the back of the chair in Anna's old room. She moved slowly, but with grace in every gesture, as if even her silence had weight. "Morning," she said, her voice hoarse. Max waved. "We have toast." Grace smiled, soft and genuine, and Daniel felt something shift in the room, like the sunlight through the blinds found a new path to fall. They ate breakfast without speaking much. Max filled the gaps with chatter about math homework and the neighbor's cat. Daniel listened with half an ear. His focus kept drifting. To the way Grace held her mug with both hands. To the way she glanced at the window, then the door as if checking for escape routes. To the edge of a scar peeking just above the collar of her shirt. He knew scars. He had his own. When Max ran off to get dressed, Grace stayed at the table, tracing the wood grain with her fingertips. "This house feels like it's still listening," she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. "I don't mean that in a creepy way," she added. "It just doesn't feel empty, even after everything." "You don't know what happened here," he said, sharper than he intended. Grace didn't flinch. "I don't need to," she said. "I can feel it." Silence thickened between them. Daniel stood, gathered the plates, and turned his back to her. Later he found her in the backyard, facing the tree Max had planted last spring. The little maple, barely more than a sapling, stood crooked in its frame of support sticks. A single red leaf clung to its branch, trembling in the breeze. Grace was still. Daniel watched from the porch. "I like it," she said without turning around. It's trying so hard to grow. Daniel stepped closer. Max calls it the promise tree. Grace looked at him, eyebrows raised. He said we needed something to take care of, to prove we're still growing too. For a long time she said nothing. Then, do you believe in promises? Daniel's jaw clenched. Not anymore. She nodded, like she understood. Maybe she did. That night, Daniel stood outside the guest room, hand hovering near the door. On the other side, Grace slept in the room where Anna used to sew. Her dress still hung behind the door untouched. He didn't knock. He turned, walked away, and sat in the dark living room with the photo album he hadn't opened in years. The first picture was of Anna laughing beside the old maple tree before it burned. Her hand rested on her pregnant belly. Daniel remembered taking the photo. He remembered thinking he'd never need anything more in life. Then the fire came. The house collapsed. The grief sharpened. The town whispered. No one blamed him out loud, but no one invited him back either. In the morning, Grace was already up. She'd made coffee. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching her pour into 3 mugs. "One for Max," she said. "One for me. One for the guy who still thinks I'm leaving today." "I thought you were." "I was," she said. "But I figured one more day wouldn't hurt." She smiled, small and brave. Daniel didn't smile back, but he didn't argue either. The ground was still soft from the storm. Beneath Daniel's boots, mud clung in thick clumps and fallen leaves stuck to everything like forgotten thoughts. He hadn't meant to start working in the yard that morning. It just happened. He was clearing out the back shed when Max came running with a rusted trowel in hand. "Can we plant something?" the boy asked. Daniel looked up from the tangled garden hose he'd been uncoiling. "Now?" "Yeah. We have those wildflower seeds from last year. I think they're still good." Grace appeared in the doorway behind Max, one hand on the frame, the other steadying her chair. She was watching them with that quiet, half-curious look that had become so familiar over the past 2 days, like she wasn't sure whether to join in or stay invisible. Daniel didn't answer Max right away. Instead, he wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "Let's see if we can find the seeds." They did. The packet was crumpled, water-stained, and had been tucked in the back of a drawer in the laundry room. Max held it like a treasure map. "Grace," he called out, "can you help us pick a spot?" She raised an eyebrow. "I thought this was a 2-man operation." "It is," Max said, "but Dad says you're good at noticing things." Daniel looked at his son, surprised. That wasn't something Max usually said. Grace laughed softly and rolled forward onto the back patio. "Well then," she said, scanning the overgrown space with a practiced eye, "if we're planting something that needs light, I'd say just past that old bench. See how the sun falls right there after 10? Daniel followed her gaze. He hated how much she was right. For the next hour, the 3 of them worked. Max dug shallow holes with the trowel, Daniel pulled weeds and cleared dead leaves, and Grace directed from the sidelines, occasionally rolling close enough to toss stones into a rusted bucket. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't even neat, but it felt like something. "You know," Grace said, shading her eyes with one hand, "this would be easier if you had a raised bed. Easier to reach, better drainage, and no bending." Daniel nodded, filing that away without committing to anything. Max looked up. "Can we build one?" "We'll see," Daniel replied. But Grace caught the way his lips twitched, just enough to register as a maybe. Later, while Max chased a butterfly with a stick, Daniel sat beside Grace on the porch step. She was sipping water from a jar, the sun catching the edges of her face, softening everything. Her sleeves were rolled up. Daniel noticed a faint line of scar tissue along her forearm. "You said you used to be a nurse," he said. She nodded. "ER. 8 years. What happened?" She hesitated. "Car wreck," she said finally. "Highway pileup. I was off duty. Saw it happen. Pulled a little girl out of the back seat just before it caught fire." Daniel's chest tightened. Grace took a slow breath. She didn't make it. Smoke inhalation. He looked away. I got this, she added, tapping her leg, and a lifetime of what-ifs. The silence stretched, but not uncomfortably. Daniel cleared his throat. I was a builder, residential mostly, houses, additions, back when I still thought I knew what home meant. Grace tilted her head. And now? I'm still figuring it out. She didn't press, didn't offer pity, just nodded, as if to say, me too. That evening, Daniel started sketching plans for a raised garden, bed, just a rough draft, lines and numbers on the back of an envelope. He told himself it was for Max, or maybe the yard. But when he glanced at the hallway where Grace's wheelchair was parked just outside the guest room, he knew. The next day, wood was delivered. Max helped measure. Grace offered input. It took 3 afternoons and more curse words than Daniel wanted to admit, but they finished it. A sturdy, waist-high rectangle near the edge of the yard. On the last day, as they packed up tools, Grace brushed dirt from her hands and looked at Daniel. It's beautiful, she said. It's functional, he replied. She smiled. Sometimes, things can be both. They planted the wildflowers together, seeds scattered like tiny hopes in fresh soil. Grace leaned over the side, pressing each one in with care. Max named the spot the quiet garden. And just behind it, the maple sapling, stood tall, leaves fluttering in the wind. Daniel watched them both, the garden and the tree, and felt something shift inside. Not healed, not whole, but possible. That night, Grace lit a candle in the kitchen after Max went to bed. She didn't ask, just placed it in the center of the table and struck a match. Daniel walked in, drying his hands. We losing power? No, she said. I just think it's good to light things, especially when you're not sure what comes next. The flame flickered between them. Shadows played on the walls. The kitchen, usually so quiet, felt held. Daniel sat across from her, not speaking, not looking away. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man hiding from his life. He felt like someone beginning to return to it. It began with music, a soft hum drifting down the hallway, just barely audible above the quiet ticking of the old kitchen clock. Grace was singing, not loudly, not even fully in tune, but gently, like the melody wasn't for anyone else, just herself. Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, hands still wet from washing dishes, frozen mid-motion. The sound caught him off guard. No one had sung in this house since Anna. He followed the sound down the hall past Max's room toward the guest room, Anna's old sewing room now carrying the faint scent of something new. Lavender. And time passing. The door was ajar. Inside, Grace was organizing the top drawer of the nightstand, folding a few pieces of clothing she'd unpacked into neat stacks. The wedding dress still hung near the window, catching light like a ghost. Daniel knocked once on the frame. Grace looked up, startled but not embarrassed. Sorry, she said. I didn't mean to snoop. I was just trying to feel like I'm not a guest anymore. Daniel shook his head. You're not. It slipped out. Before he could take it back, before he could wrap it in disclaimers or distance. Grace blinked. A heartbeat passed between them. Then, too, she smiled, but it was a sad, grateful smile. Thank you. They ended up on the back porch that afternoon. Max was at a neighbor's house, and the house was finally achingly quiet. Grace had a blanket over her legs, the breeze tugging gently at her hair. Daniel sat beside her, hands in his lap, eyes on the yard. The raised bed, the little maple tree, with its stubborn red leaves. I don't talk about her much, Daniel said. Grace turned to him, silent, waiting. My wife, Anna. Grace nodded once, still not speaking. She died in a house fire, 5 years ago. Max was 4. Daniel's voice was even, practiced, not cold, just worn thin. She got Max out, went back in for the dog. Grace's lips parted slightly, not a gasp, just breath-catching. I couldn't get to her in time. He didn't elaborate, didn't mention the screams, the heat, the smoke that clung to his skin for weeks. The burn scar on his shoulder he still couldn't look at in the mirror. She used to sing in the mornings, he added after a long pause. I haven't heard singing in this house since. Grace didn't say sorry. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his, quietly, without a word. That evening, something changed. Daniel was repairing the old dining chair with a splintered leg when Grace came into the garage holding a small wooden box. I found this in the linen closet, she said. I think it's yours. He took it from her without thinking. Opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Folded neatly. Dated. All addressed. To Anna. Daniel felt his chest collapse inward. He hadn't seen these in years. He'd written them in the weeks and months after her death, when grief was too loud to speak and too heavy to hold. He hadn't remembered putting them in a box, hadn't remembered keeping them. Grace took a step back. I didn't read them, just the top one. I'm sorry. Daniel stared at her. You had no right, he said, quietly. Sharply. Grace's face flushed. You're right. I didn't. He set the box down on the workbench, lid snapping closed with a sound that seemed to echo. Please don't go through my things again, he added. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was fear, wearing the mask of control. Grace nodded once, eyes down. I'll stay out of your way. She turned her chair, rolled toward the door. Daniel wanted to stop her. To say something, anything that could claw back the space now opening between them like a fault line. But he didn't. He let her go. That night the house felt cold. Max noticed it too. He ate his dinner with a quiet frown, glancing between the empty space where Grace usually sat and his father's silence. Did she leave? He asked. No, Daniel said. She's just resting. Did you make her sad? Daniel paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. I think I did, he said softly. Max considered that, then nodded. You should fix it. Like the chair. Daniel almost laughed. Almost. Later, after Max was asleep, Daniel stood outside the guest room again. His hand hovered near the door just like it had nights ago. This time, though, he knocked. Grace's voice came through, barely audible. It's open. She was reading, legs tucked under the blanket, face calm but unreadable. Daniel stood in the doorway. I'm sorry, he said. Grace looked at him for a long time. I was trying to understand you, she replied, not invade. Your grief. Daniel nodded. I know. I'm not your wife, she added gently. And I'm not trying to be. I know that too. They sat in the quiet that followed. The rain had started again, soft this time, like something cleansing, not punishing. Daniel lowered himself onto the edge of the window seat, watching it fall. I never let anyone stay in this room, he said. Not even family. Grace closed her book. Why me? Daniel exhaled. I don't know, he said. Maybe because you didn't ask for anything. They didn't say much after that, but as Daniel stood to leave, Grace's voice stopped him. Do you still write letters to her? He hesitated. No. I think she'd want you to start writing again, she said. Then, after a pause, even if it's to someone else. Daniel didn't answer. But that night, long after the lights were off and the house was still, he pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote, Today I remembered what sunlight looks like when it falls on someone else's face. I remembered what it's like to be afraid of something good. Her name is Grace. It happened gradually, not with declarations or grand gestures or even plans. Just a series of small moments that began to string together like lights on a porch, quiet, warm, almost invisible until you stepped back and noticed the glow. They started having breakfast together. That was new. Max would wake first, clatter around the kitchen with too much energy for that hour, and Grace would join a few minutes later, wheeling herself in with sleep-tousled hair and that soft, worn cardigan she'd taken to wearing every morning. Daniel would always be last, silent, careful, never quite relaxed but no longer distant. They never talked about how long Grace would stay. No one asked, and no one offered. But her toothbrush was in the bathroom now. Her coat hung on the wall peg between Max's and Daniel's, and the seat at the kitchen table, the one across from Daniel and beside Max, was never empty anymore. On the first Thursday of December, Maggie from the bakery dropped by. She was in her 60s, all silver curls and cinnamon perfume, with a habit of bringing muffins just in case the boy's still growing. She walked right into the kitchen without knocking, as Ridgewood people did, and froze when she saw Grace seated at the table. "Oh," Maggie said. "I didn't know you had company." Daniel opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Max piped up, "She's not company, she lives here." Grace blinked. So did Daniel. Maggie, to her credit, recovered quickly. "Well then," she said, smiling, "I suppose I brought enough muffins after all." That weekend, Daniel fixed the front porch light. It had been flickering for months, too low on the priority list to deal with. But Grace had mentioned it once, offhandedly, something about how nice it would be to sit outside at night without being in the dark. So he bought the bulb and rewired the socket. When he tested the switch and the light flared to life, warm and steady, Grace clapped her hands softly like a child watching fireworks. He didn't say anything, just turned back toward the tool shed with a quiet sort of satisfaction humming in his chest. Sunday night, Max asked if they could all do dinner, like a real family. Grace paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Aren't we all ready?" Max shrugged. "Well, kind of. But real families have traditions, like pizza night, or stories, so they made pizza from scratch." Grace mixed the dough, Daniel chopped toppings, Max spilled half the cheese on the floor. After dinner, they sat in the living room and shared stories. Max told a wildly embellished tale about the time he chased a squirrel and ended up in the neighbor's chicken coop. Grace shared how, in nursing school, she once fainted during her first blood draw and woke up with a lollipop in her hand and no memory of how it got there. Then Daniel, who rarely spoke about himself at all, told them about the first treehouse he ever built, how it collapsed the moment he climbed in because he forgot to account for the weight. They laughed. Real open laughter, the kind that filled a room and made it feel whole. Later, as Daniel collected the empty mugs from the coffee table, Grace touched his arm gently. "Thank you," she said. He didn't ask for what. He just nodded. One afternoon, Daniel found Grace in the backyard, her wheelchair parked beside the raised garden bed. The wildflowers were starting to sprout, little green threads breaking through soil in winter. He walked over, brushing off his hands from firewood. "You okay?" She nodded, eyes on the garden. "It's just, this time of year used to feel empty," she said. "But now, it feels like something's coming, like spring is actually possible." Daniel looked at the promise tree beside her. Its trunk, stronger, the last few leaves fluttering like a stubborn whisper of life. "Maybe it is," he said. She glanced at him. "You always talk like you don't believe in things anymore." He looked at her, really looked. The way her hair caught light, the lines of strength in her face, the way she sat like a woman who had fallen and stood up more than once. "I don't believe easily," he said. "But I want to." Grace smiled, and it wasn't sad this time, just soft. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a sheet of paper like he had before. The box of letters still sat on the shelf above the fridge, unopened, but this letter wasn't for Anna. "We had pizza tonight. Grace makes terrible dough, but Max says it's the best thing he's ever eaten." I didn't correct him. She smiled, at me today, really smiled, and it scared the hell out of me. I think I'm afraid of being happy again. Not because I don't want it, but because I remember how much it hurt to lose it. He didn't sign the letter, just folded it and placed it beside the candle Grace had lit days ago. The flame was out now, but the wax still held its shape. The first sign came with the phone call. Grace was in the kitchen, slicing apples with quiet focus, when the landline, promised a rare thing since almost no one used it anymore. Daniel was outside stacking firewood with Max, their laughter carrying faintly through the window. She picked it up. Hello? A pause. Then a voice she hadn't heard in over a year. Grace. You really thought you could disappear? She froze. Her breath caught. The apple slid from her fingers and thudded softly to the floor. I'm coming to get what's mine, the voice said. You know you owe me. Then, a click. Grace stood still for a long moment, the receiver humming in her hand. She didn't tell Daniel right away. That night, they had dinner as usual. Max talked about a class project involving papier-mâché planets. Daniel asked if Grace wanted to help repaint the shed that weekend. She smiled, nodded, laughed when Max made a face about Saturn. But her smile was hollow. Her laughter cracked at the edges. Later in the bathroom, she stared at her reflection, noticed how her shoulders curled slightly inward, how her eyes kept flicking toward the door like it might swing open without warning. He found her like that, leaning on the sink with white knuckles. Everything okay? She met his gaze in the mirror. Not really. They sat on the porch long after Max went to bed, wrapped in silence and layers of old wool blankets. Grace told him about Eric, her ex-fiancé, the one who left her at the altar. But that wasn't the whole story. He was charming at first, she said. Kind, attentive, then controlling, angry. I didn't notice it at first, or maybe I did and didn't want to. Daniel's jaw clenched. When I got hurt, she continued, it was like I became a burden to him, something broken, and when I finally told him I was leaving, he didn't take it well. Daniel stayed quiet, but the storm inside him rose, like a tide. He called today, Grace added. He found me. Daniel turned toward her fully now. Did he threaten you? He said he was coming. Then we go to the police. She shook her head. There's no proof, no recording. He's careful like that. Daniel stared into the dark yard, hands tightening into fists. I won't let him near you, he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a promise. It was fact. The next morning, Daniel spoke with Sheriff Tom, a longtime friend who'd always kept a respectful distance since Anna's death. Tom listened carefully, eyes narrowing at the mention of Eric's name. I'll keep an eye out, he said. But without a restraining order or a documented threat, my hands are tied. Daniel didn't say what he wanted to. Didn't say he didn't trust the law to protect what mattered. Didn't say he knew exactly what it felt like to be too late. Back home, Grace stayed close to Max. Her movements more careful. Her glances more frequent. Max noticed, of course, kids always do. Is someone bad coming? He asked that evening, his voice quiet as he stirred his macaroni. Grace looked at Daniel, then back at Max. Maybe, she said gently. But we'll be okay. Max thought for a second, then stood and walked to the living room. When he returned, he held out a small stuffed bear, threadbare and missing one eye. This is Bear Bear, he said. He's my bravest friend. You can sleep with him if you want. Grace took the bear like it was something sacred. Her voice broke. Thank you. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood by the window watching the front yard, the empty road beyond it, the stillness too perfect to trust. He hadn't felt this way in years, like prey in his own home, waiting for something to move in the dark. At some point, Grace joined him. No words, just her hand brushing his lightly, resting beside his on the windowsill. You should sleep, he said. So should you. He turned to her finally, saw the worry carved into her face, the fatigue behind her eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. For what? For letting you feel like you have to handle this alone. Grace leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. You didn't let me. she said. I've just been doing it for so long, I forgot how not to. The next day passed quietly. Too quietly. They stayed close to home. Daniel cleaned his old rifle, the one he'd kept stored and untouched in the closet since Anna died. He didn't say why. Grace didn't ask. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a car slowed as it passed the driveway. An unfamiliar sedan. Windows tinted. It didn't stop, but it lingered. Long enough. Daniel stepped off the porch and stood at the end of the drive, watching until the car disappeared around the bend. Max came to the door behind him. Dad? Daniel turned. Go inside. Lock the door. Later, after dinner, Daniel sat in the living room polishing the rifle. Max had gone to bed. Grace wheeled in quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. I can leave, she said, setting the mugs down. You don't have to say it. I know this is a lot. Daniel looked at her. She was tired, frightened, but still here. You're not going anywhere, he said. Not now. Not ever because of him. Grace searched his face. I don't want to bring danger into your life. Into Max's. Daniel set the rifle aside and stood. He walked to her slowly, then knelt, down on both knees, in front of her chair. She froze. I lost everything once, he said. And I told myself I wouldn't let anyone back in because the risk was too much, but I was wrong. He reached up, placed his hand over hers. You're my miracle, Grace. I'll fight for it this time. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent, unstoppable. She didn't speak. She just reached forward and held him. The air changed first. That morning, Ridgewood felt off. The sky hung low with thick clouds, not rain-heavy, but heavy with something else, pressure. The kind you feel in your chest before a storm, or before something breaks. Daniel knew that kind of silence, the kind that came just before fire. Grace noticed it too. She barely touched her breakfast. Max asked if he could stay home from school. Daniel said yes. He didn't want his son anywhere else today. At 3:18 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was a sound that hadn't meant much before. Maybe a package, a neighbor dropping off eggs. But today, it sliced through the air like a warning bell. Daniel looked through the front window. The man standing at the door wore a pressed button-down, his sleeves rolled neatly, his hair combed back with practiced ease. But his smile was wrong. Too smooth, too still. Eric. Daniel opened the door but didn't move aside. Eric raised an eyebrow. You, Daniel? Who's asking? I'm here for Grace. We've got unfinished business. Daniel didn't blink. She's not going anywhere. Eric smirked. That's not your call. Behind him, Grace appeared at the end of the hallway. She had wheeled herself just far enough to see. When her eyes met Eric's, she stopped cold. Leave, she said. Eric's smile vanished. His voice lowered. I told you. You don't get to disappear, Grace. You think this little halfway house is going to keep you safe? Daniel stepped forward, shoulders squared. You're done here, Eric laughed once. You really think you scare me? I don't have to, Daniel said quietly. But I won't let you touch her. They stared at each other. 2 men with very different kinds of rage in their eyes. Eric leaned closer. You know what she is, don't you? A liability, a mess, a pity project. Daniel didn't flinch. He just closed the door, locked it, turned back to Grace, whose face had gone pale. He won't stop, she whispered. Daniel stepped forward. Then neither will I. The power went out just after sunset. Max was in the living room coloring. Grace was trying to keep her hands steady enough to slice vegetables. Daniel was by the window again, rifle within reach. Then, darkness. Total, not a flicker. Not a blown fuse, intentional. Daniel grabbed the flashlight, handed one to Grace, and sent Max to the back room, the one with the heavy oak door and no windows. The safest place. Don't come out unless I call you, he said, kneeling in front of his son. Max looked up at him, eyes wide. Are we in danger? Daniel didn't lie. Yes. But I won't let anything happen to you. Max nodded once, then hugged him. Quick, tight. Daniel held on just a second longer. The back porch creaked. Daniel heard it. Subtle, too light to be wind. Then the back door knob twisted once, twice. A bang. He moved, fast but calm, rifle in. Hand, flashlight off. He met Eric in the kitchen. Move, Eric growled. No. Eric stepped forward. Don't be a hero. I'm not. I'm a man protecting what matters. Eric lunged. The fight wasn't elegant. There were no perfect punches, no heroic flips. Just two men grappling in a kitchen filled with shadows and shattered plates. Daniel took a hit to the ribs, another to the jaw. His rifle clattered to the floor. But when Eric moved for the hallway, toward Max, toward Grace, Daniel tackled him into the counter with everything he had left. The old kettle fell. The stove clicked. Gas hissed. Daniel smelled it. Eric didn't. You're going to burn. Everything down, Daniel shouted, wrestling Eric back. Eric swung wildly, caught Daniel's shoulder. The gas grew thicker. Daniel kicked the stove shut, grabbed the rifle, raised it, not to fire but to hold steady. Get out. Eric stood panting, blood on his lip. This isn't over, he spat. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Eric turned and fled. Silence fell like ash. Grace wheeled in, breath shallow, flashlight trembling in her hand. You're hurt, she said. Daniel looked down, blood on his shirt. Couldn't even remember from where. Max emerged from the hallway, tears in his eyes, fists clenched. Daniel dropped to one knee, pulled him in. I'm okay, he whispered. We're okay. Grace joined them, resting one hand on Daniel's back. They stayed like that. The three of them huddled on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken things. The fire didn't start, but something else had. Daniel stood that night on the porch with a bandage around his shoulder and the rifle by his side. The sky had cleared. The wind was calm. He looked up at the stars, endless, uncaring, beautiful. Grace joined him. No words, just a blanket over her lap and a hand resting against his. I meant what I said, he told her. I'll fight for this. I know, she said. She looked toward the promise tree. A single green bud had appeared near the top, brave against the early frost. They didn't sleep that night, even after the police came, even after Sheriff Tom filed the report and confirmed Eric was gone with it for now. The house never settled. The walls seemed to hum with leftover adrenaline, the furniture holding the tension like breath. Max slept eventually, curled in Daniel's bed, Bear clutched in one hand. Grace didn't go back to the guest room. She stayed in the kitchen, a blanket around her shoulders, eyes locked on nothing. Daniel sat beside her, his body sore, his ribs a dull ache, a butterfly bandage over his eyebrow. But he didn't feel any of it. Not the pain, not the cold, just the weight of it all. In the morning, they found the shed burned, blackened wood, ash along the foundation. The fire hadn't reached the house, hadn't jumped the fence, but it had been close. Sheriff Tom suspected Eric had come back during the night, lit it and run. There wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. No prints, no witnesses, just smoke and the silence of something taken. Daniel stood with Grace and Max in front of the ruin. Max tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Did the garden burn? Daniel stepped forward, crunching over scorched grass. He turned the corner, held his breath. The raised bed was charred at one edge, but intact. And the promise tree? Still standing, a little scorched. A few leaves blackened, but alive. Grace cried then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just tears sliding down her cheeks like rain on glass. Daniel didn't say anything, just walked to her and wrapped his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him. Max, without a word, went inside and brought out a watering can. He poured it gently at the base of the tree. That afternoon, Daniel began cleaning up the shed. The smell of smoke clung to everything. Most of his tools were gone. His workbench, hand-built from reclaimed oak, reduced to black fragments. Grace found him there an hour later, sitting on a half-burned stump, staring at nothing. You okay? She asked. No, he said, but I will be. She didn't try to fix it, just sat nearby and passed him a bottle of water. They worked in silence for hours. Grace helped sort what could be salvaged. Max swept ashes with a tiny broom he insisted was just the right size. It was strange, Daniel thought, the way grief and gratitude could coexist. The shed was gone, but they were still here. That evening they had grilled cheese and soup for dinner. Nothing fancy, just warm. Max insisted they light a candle. "This one," he said, holding up a stubby white taper, "is for things we still have." They placed it in the middle of the table. Grace touched Daniel's hand without looking up. "I thought losing everything meant starting over completely," she said. "But maybe it just means starting with what matters." Daniel nodded, voice quiet. "It's not the same as before." "It's not supposed to be." After dinner, Daniel took out his notebook, the one he hadn't touched since the fire. He flipped past the old letters to Anna, found a clean page. "The shed is gone. I should feel broken, but she sat with me in the ash, and he, Max, brought water to a half-burned tree. There's a kind of hope that only grows in ruin. I don't know if this is what love looks like now, but I think it might be." Later that night, Daniel and Grace stood together by the back window. Outside, the promise tree swayed slightly in the wind, its scorched leaves whispering against the dark. "There's something I didn't tell you," Grace said. Daniel turned to her. "I almost didn't come into the church that day. I sat outside for 20 minutes in the car. Thought maybe I'd drive away and no one would know." "What made you stay?" She looked down. "I don't know. Maybe I hoped someone might still choose me, even if I was broken." Daniel reached for her hand. "I didn't choose you out of pity, Grace. I know. I chose you because something in me recognized something in you, like two broken things that fit." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "Me too," he said. "But I'm not walking away." That night, Max asked if they could all sleep in the living room, just for tonight. So they dragged out pillows, blankets, and an old sleeping bag. Grace curled on the couch. Daniel lay on the floor beside Max. The candle burned low on the coffee table. Before the flame went out, Max whispered, "I'm glad you didn't leave, Grace." "Me too," she whispered back. Daniel didn't say anything. But as the light flickered and faded, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. It started with a hammer. One morning, Daniel stepped outside to find a bucket of nails on the porch. No note. Just sitting there, waiting. Next to it, a bundle of fresh wood slats, oak, sanded. Good quality. Later that afternoon, Walt, the retired carpenter from down the road, showed up with his tool belt slung low over his hips and a thermos of black coffee. "I heard your shed got torched," he said without preamble. Daniel nodded. Walt jerked his thumb toward the driveway. "Got some free time. Thought maybe you'd want a hand." Daniel blinked. "You don't have to." Walt cut him off. "Didn't ask if I had to. I showed up." He turned and headed for the ruins without another word. By the end of the week, 3 more neighbors had joined. Maggie brought cinnamon rolls and refused to let anyone eat without taking their gloves off first. Tom from the gas station loaned his old circular saw. Sheriff Tom, out of uniform, dropped by with a bag of roofing nails and a simple, steady nod. No one made a speech. No one asked for details. They just built. Together. Grace watched it all. From the porch, a blanket draped over her legs, steam rising from her coffee mug. Max ran between adults like a puppy, handing screws, measuring boards, handing out high fives with abandon. And Daniel smiled more that week than he had in the last 5 years. Not the half smiles he gave Max, or the polite ones he offered townsfolk from behind his guard. Real ones, the kind that started slow, warmed the face, and stayed. One afternoon, while sanding a plank, Daniel looked up and saw Grace watching him. with that soft, unspoken look she'd developed. Part admiration, part disbelief, part something deeper he wasn't ready to name. He wiped his hands and walked over. "You okay?" She nodded. "More than okay." They stood there for a while in the quiet hum of hammers and voices. Grace reached out and touched the edge of the new frame going up. "Did you ever think this town would show up for you again?" Daniel exhaled. "No, I figured I'd used up my chance." Grace looked at him. "They were just waiting for you to stop hiding." That evening, Max insisted they all eat dinner outside, on the makeshift work table under the string light someone had strung between two trees without asking. "Picnic night," he declared. So they did. Grace made chili. Daniel grilled toast. The neighbors sat on milk crates, toolboxes, overturned buckets. Someone brought out an old guitar. Someone else sang a Willie Nelson song, off-key but full of heart. When the stars came out, Maggie passed around mugs of cocoa and said, "This feels like something we'll talk about 10 years from now." No one disagreed. The next morning, Daniel found Grace in the garden again. The wildflowers had started blooming, bright purples, soft oranges, stubborn blues. Their roots had found something in that tired soil worth holding on to. He knelt beside her as she watered the promise tree. Its leaves were green again, bold and full. "It made it," she said. "So did we," he replied. Grace looked at him. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Daniel paused, then nodded. "We're not where we were, and we're not where we're going. But right now, we're okay." By the end of the week, the shed was rebuilt, stronger than before, a little taller, with better insulation and wide enough, doors that Grace could wheel in without bumping her knuckles. Walt patted the frame and said, "Didn't think I'd be doing this kind of work again, but damn, it feels good." Max made a sign out of scrap wood and carved the words, "Still Standing," in shaky block letters. They nailed it above the door. That night, Daniel pulled out the letterbox again, but this time, he didn't write to Anna. He wrote to someone new. "Dear Grace, I didn't know it was possible to be broken and brave at the same time. You taught me that. I see you, not as someone I need to fix or protect or keep safe, but someone I choose to stand beside. You made this house feel like home again. You made me believe the fire didn't take everything." He didn't give her the letter, but he folded it, placed it in the box, and set it back on the shelf. Not as something to bury, but as something to keep. Later that evening, Grace wheeled out to the porch, where Daniel was tightening a new gutter bracket. The sun was sinking low, throwing gold across the yard. "Max is asking if we can build a birdhouse," she said. Daniel smiled. "He's already planning the blueprints?" He drew one on the back of a cereal box. Daniel wiped his hands and sat beside her. They looked out at the promise tree, now surrounded by wildflowers, the shed standing proud behind it. "Feels different," Grace whispered. "It is," Daniel said. She looked at him, eyes full of quiet. "I'm not afraid to stay anymore." Daniel reached for her hand. "You don't have to be." The table came first. Daniel built it from scratch, not because they needed one, but because something in him said they did. Something permanent, solid. His hands, calloused and sure again, worked through the grain like it was an old language he'd nearly forgotten. He used cedar for the legs, oak for the top. Max helped sand the edges smooth, laughing when the dust made him sneeze. Grace sat nearby with a sketch pad, drawing ideas for a centerpiece they'd never use but liked to. Imagine it wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect, but it had 4 chairs, and Daniel built each one himself. The first night they sat at that table, Max placed the napkins with serious focus. Grace lit a candle, her hands steady. Daniel ladled soup into bowls and didn't say a word when Grace reached across and adjusted the salt. When they ate, they didn't speak much, but no one reached for their phone. No one looked at the clock. They were all there, completely. That week, life settled into a new rhythm. Max went back to school. Grace started physical therapy again, 3 mornings a week, and came home flushed and proud. Daniel took on a few jobs around town, Porch repairs, gutter work, odd fixes that kept his hands moving and his mind still. In the evenings, they cooked together. Max called it family hour. Sometimes Grace would hum a little while chopping vegetables and Daniel would pause just to listen, not to the tune, but to the fact it was there at all. She hummed in his kitchen. She stayed. One night, as the first frost settled on the windows, Daniel found Grace outside by the promise tree. She had a shawl over her shoulders, her breath visible in the cold. He walked up slowly, hands in his pockets. "You're not supposed to be out in this weather," she smiled. "You're starting to sound like an old man." He chuckled, then stood beside her. The tree had grown. Stronger now. Even in the cold, its shape held firm. At the base, Max had placed a small wooden sign. "We choose this. Every day." Daniel traced the letters with his finger. "He asked me what that meant the other day," Grace said softly. "What did you tell him? That family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who you stay with, who you show up for." Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't think I could do this again," he admitted. "Not after Anna, not after the fire. It felt like everything good had already happened." Grace turned to him. "And now?" "I'm scared," he said. "Not of loving you, of losing you." She reached up, brushing a curl from his forehead. "That's the cost, isn't it?" He nodded. "But I'll pay it." She leaned in, resting, her head on his chest. "I already am," he whispered. That weekend, the town held its winter market. They went together, the three of them, through stalls of knitted scarves, hot cider, and paper stars strung between streetlights. People smiled at them, waved, offered extra cookies to Max and quiet nods to Daniel. No one asked about the fire, no one mentioned Eric, they just welcomed them, as if they'd always been there. At one point, Maggie pulled Daniel aside and handed him a tin of cinnamon rolls. "For your family," she said. Daniel didn't correct her. He just said thank you. That night, back home, Max asked if he could say grace before dinner. Daniel blinked, surprised. Of course. They joined hands around the table, 4 chairs filled. Max closed his eyes, cleared his throat. "Thank you for the food. Thank you for the tree that didn't die. Thank you that Grace stayed. And thank you that Dad's laugh came back." Amen. Silence. Then Daniel looked across the table, to Grace, who was smiling with tear-bright eyes, and to Max, who reached for another roll like it was no big deal. Daniel laughed. It was a soft sound, worn around the edges, but real. Later that evening, after Max went to bed, Daniel and Grace sat by the fireplace. The light flickered across the walls, casting long shadows that no longer felt like ghosts, only reminders. Grace leaned into him. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't stayed that first night?" "Every day," he said, and he looked down at her, at the way the firelight caught in her eyes. "I think you were the first good thing to walk through that door in a very long time." She reached for his hand. "No promises?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Just choices. Every day, every single one." They sat like that in silence, fingers laced, the fire crackling low. Outside, frost dusted the edge of the porch, and just beyond, the promise tree stood tall, unmoving, unafraid. Epilogue, a whisper, not a bow. Spring would come. The flowers would bloom again. Max would grow taller. Grace would walk a few more steps. Daniel would rebuild something more than a house, something with roots. They would argue. They would cry. They would sit quietly on stormy days and hum to the sound of rain on the roof. But they would stay. Because sometimes, that's all love really is. Staying. Choosing. Again and again. If this story touched you, stay with us. Not forever. Just tomorrow. And the day after that. If something in this story stirred your heart, even just a little, leave a like, just to let us know you're still here. And if you'd like to stay close to stories like this, subscribe to the channel, not as a promise forever, just so we can find each other again on the days you need a place to come home to.